period of time, prehistory. Like really you could argue from about 200,000 BCE until 4,000 BCE. Okay, that's like about 200,000 years, folks. Okay, or 196,000 years if we really want to be a math major, although they're rounded off anyway, right? So a very long period of time during which humans did not leave the written record, left other records, in fact their own bones, maybe their genetic material. There's a new way to trace the past, 23andMe. Get your cheek swabbed and find out where your ancestors were thousands of years ago, or maybe hundreds of years ago. So yeah, we kind of carry around these primary sources in our genetic material. Go figure, it's gotten some people in trouble, like Thomas Jefferson, perhaps. Okay, maybe talk about that later. So anyway, we discussed prehistory or the prehistoric era, which is really the expertise of anthropologists, especially within that field, archaeologists, paleoanthropologists. We kind of pick up the story once we get some cities in writing, so people can kind of tell us exactly what they're thinking and doing. We don't have to guess how old bones are, what cave paintings actually meant. Okay? So, chapter 2 in our text is kind of chapter 1 in history, if that makes any sense at all, where we see early societies in Southwest Asia. Time out, where's Southwest Asia? Today we might call that the Middle East, but that's not really an appropriate term. It's like, middle of what? Well, it was midway from Britain to India when India owned Britain. Okay, whole age of 19th century imperialism, it was midway to the east, so that British name, at least in English, stuck. I've seen it in French as well. West of Midi. We'll call Southwest Asia, it's a little bit more appropriate. That's topic 1, and then the Indo-European migrations, topic 2. People who ended up stretching from India to Europe, right? They didn't come from India and Europe and end up someplace else. Well, I guess eventually we do, because maybe some of my ancestors. But we'll see this mass movement of people out of basically southern Russia and Ukraine, okay? The Caucasus region, kind of northwestern Asia, into many pockets of the Eastern Hemisphere, including India and Europe and points in between. So I think that's really interesting. By the way, the Indo-Europeans who make these massive, kind of long-term, slow, meandering, incremental migrations across much of the Eastern Hemisphere, did not leave any written records. They had iron technology and they left their language, and linguistics, which is another branch of anthropology, began to study like why are languages so similar, stretching from, I don't know, Ireland to India. The grammatical structure, some of the words are similar. And they began to piece this together and found out that there's some commonalities among many languages stretching through this vast region. Not all languages, okay? We're not talking about some Tower of Babylon type scenario. We're talking about a people who spoke kind of a Proto-Indo-European or an early Indo-European language, and they spread out, and their children, and their children's children, and their many generations spread through this region, intermarried with local people who lived in those regions, and mixed their genes, G-E-N-E-S, as well as their languages. Okay, so that's where we're headed in this lecture. We'll do about 40 minutes. I'm probably going to get up and move around and check the camera, because there's no camera person. I am not Stephen Colbert. No, I do not have I do have my hair's a bit longer, but I don't have a camera person. So let me check the camera right now to make sure I'm not just talking to empty space. Yes, okay, and we've already done 10 out of 20 minutes, so that's important for me to know as well. There'll be 10 minutes left in this segment. Perfect. Okay. Mesopotamia. Meso means middle. Potamia has to do with rivers, so the land between the rivers. What rivers? The Euphrates and Tigris rivers, so the land between these rivers. Today we would call that largely Iraq, but of course that's a modern political, 20th century political construction. Irrigation in this region led to wide-scale farming. Okay, so farming, we know, had been invented, so to speak, in some places of the world, especially this is one of the first along the banks of this river. Rivers, riverine civilization. You need water to farm productively. Okay? So irrigation would allow for even more farming, right? Bring the river to your crops. If your farm is not on the banks of the river, but maybe inland, a couple hundred meters, dig a channel and bring the river, right, to your farm. More food, more people. More people, more complexity. Right? So the large population by about 4,000 BCE, again folks, that's about 6,000 years ago, into this region were Semitic-speaking people. So a language group, Semitic-speaking people, ancestors to these languages would be both Hebrew and Arabic, moving into this region. Why? Because there are jobs there. But people move, right? There's water there, there's farming, there are jobs. So people moving into this region, Semitic migrations. By about this time, 4,000 BCE, there's writing. There were, look, historians will call them cities. They're really like mud brick villages, okay? They're not like, megapolis, if that's even a word. Extra urban venues like we might see today, obviously. There are mud brick huts along the banks of the river, but people are no longer hunting and gathering. They might fish, they might hike on occasionally like people do today, but it's not the basis of their sustenance here in southern Mesopotamia. We also go Sumer. Notice it's just one M, we're not talking about summer vacation. Okay? So, cities were independent. They would be called city-states. Each city was its own country, with its own ruler. And unfortunately, often at war with its neighbors. Okay, like Jamestown and Dunkirk would be at war with one another. So monarchical governments, king in charge. It was male dominant, as far as we know, although they did have female religious figures quite often. Public works. Somebody needs to get us up in the morning, get out and dig the ditches, keep the canals running, build walls around the city so the people from, Dunkirk don't attack us, right? So there are rule makers. Somehow a military commander got to be in charge, and then his sons, until he's overthrown, gets to be in charge, right? Someone's making the rules, someone's explaining how the universe works, maybe some female priests or priestesses. Somebody's building the walls, somebody's doing the farming, someone's digging and actually engineering the canals. That's important. The whole slope of a line thing has to be figured out, even though I've forgotten how to do that, right? You want the water to come from the river to your farm without flooding it, right? You want enough water to come, so you've got to figure that out mathematically, right? So these people did fairly well at mathematics. They did not do so well at keeping the peace, though, right? City-states often at war with one another, almost all conquered by a northern ruler named Sargon of Akkad. He came from a place called Akkad or Agad, A-G-A-D-E, not like a god. Let's call him Sargon of Akkad. About 4,300 years ago, puts together these city-states and creates the first empire. According to legend, when his troops got to the Persian Gulf, they washed off their weapons and said, well, there'll be no more war. Sadly, that is not proven to be the case. That empire will fall about 200 years later. Things move quickly in this course, right? Look, we're not going to do every empire that ever existed, okay? Sargon kind of sets the stage for kingdoms that came later, including, more famously, perhaps, that of Hammurabi. Hammurabi's famous for, yes, law code. Great, criminal justice majors. Puts together a law code, which is more like a list of rules. Okay? 282 rules on a big black piece of rock called basalt etched into it. Okay, so writing becomes very important. And it's kind of like, if you do this, this will be the punishment. But these laws tell us a lot about society, right? You have laws to regulate the society that exists. You don't just make up laws. If you punch an alien, you'll go to jail. Like, what? That wouldn't make sense, right? We don't need that law. Not yet, anyway. But if you punch another human being, you know what's going to be the punishment. In Hammurabi's era, now he did borrow from earlier law codes. It depended on one's social class. So if you're a wealthy guy and you punch a wealthy guy, you knock out a tooth, you lose a tooth. If you're a wealthy guy and you punch a poor guy, you might have to pay a fine. If you're a wealthy guy and you punch and knock out the tooth of a slave, an enslaved person, who cares? Give his owner $5 and keep going, right? So it's lex talionis. Lex talionis means retaliation, but within the same social class. And the laws published, look, very few people could read, but enough could that by word of mouth the laws are known. Actually, they're a lot to do with sex, marriage, sex outside of marriage, we call that adultery. Read them in your book, okay? It's like, if a woman, if a wife be caught lying with another man, she gets thrown out, tied up and thrown into the river, and the other man gets thrown into the river too. But if the husband saves his wife, then the king will save the other man in the situation. So that stuff was happening. Yeah, okay, that stuff was happening 3,700 years ago and probably much longer. Okay, a lot of laws about watering down drinks. Like if a barmaid waters down your drink, like literally doesn't give you the alcohol you paid for, she gets thrown in the river. A lot of getting thrown in the river, which was more than just getting wet. I mean, I'm assuming people could not swim, right? So this was almost a capital punishment. A little bit of consumer protection. So if you build a home and it falls down and kills the owner's son, you, Mr. Builder, have your son put to death. Oh my God. Okay, so yeah, if you're a surgeon and you perform, these are all coming to mind now. Perform a surgery with a bronze lancelet and this patient dies, you get put to death. Well, I think I'm not going to major in medicine in this society, or building for that matter, or bartending. What am I going to do? Probably teach history. All right, after Hammurabi, we get later empires. We're not really going to get into these. You can read about them. They tend not to change too much. What's notable about the so-called Assyrians, this little letter C means circa. Means, well, we're just rounding off numbers here. So about 1300, we're moving through time. Apparently quite militaristic. Okay, the records they left us really glory in war. Their art is, tends to be like violent, even killing other people and lopping off their heads or ramming spears down the throats of lions. Like they gloried in that, but those are the sources we have. I mean, if future historians just kind of watch our news and our sports and our movies, they're probably going to think we were super violent too. Maybe we are. I don't know. Given the news of the last few days, maybe they'd be right. The Assyrians used iron weapons. So here's a new technology, iron. Much stronger than copper. Tin and bronze put together. So iron much stronger. Later on we have the Chaldeans. If you know your Old Testament Bible, they're called the Neo-Babylonians. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar captured Jewish people and held them captive for 50 years. Okay, we'll get to that a little bit later. Beyond the political history, I'm going to check my timer on my camera here. Oh, good. Okay, minute and a half. So what should minute and a half? I think we'll end segment 1 because I'm moving from the political, go backward, politics, right? The quest for power, who has power, how's it held, distributed, how's it changed, into social, which means people, often how do they live their daily lives, and cultural, like what did they believe, how did they express their identity. So this will be the end of part 1. Part 2 will be kind of in the link below, all right? So see you in a few minutes, or I guess maybe you'll see me whenever.